Hey folks, James Abrinio, your Northern Virginia personal injury and criminal defense lawyer. In this video, I wanted to get to the brass tacks. I thought it'd be interesting to show you an example of a personal injury car accident settlement. Now, to be clear, this is a hypothetical case only, and this is really a rough outline so you get a better sense of what happens when you settle your case. You get a better sense of what can you expect in your own case when you're settling it, and you get a better understanding of how the math works. So hopefully this is going to be super useful. And of course, if you have questions, make sure to comment below and make sure to subscribe to the channel. So let's get started. So for purpose of this example, we're going to put up some hypothetical facts. So the first one is, let's assume the accident happened July 4th of 2021. Let's assume that it's a T-bone car accident. And in this example, at least under Virginia law, under the facts, the liability is clear, meaning it's clear that you are going to convince a jury that the defendant was solely at fault for the accident. You were not contributorily negligent. Let's assume that you had some type of tendon tear in your wrist. So a serious accident, serious injury, but not catastrophic. And let's assume you had to get surgery to get it fixed. And also, let's assume one more fact that that you had a full and quick recovery. You were fully and quickly recovered. No residual injury. You had a small scar, but from a practical standpoint, you're pretty much back to normal after several months. So, pretty serious injury, but fortunately, you made a great recovery. Now, let's walk through the numbers. And actually, let me back up. Yes, let's walk through the numbers. Let's assume there's $15,000 in medical bills. So surgery bill and emergency room bill added up 15,000. Let's assume of that your health insurance. Let's assume you had health insurance. They paid your bills, and you have a health insurance lien or reimbursement of $5,000. And let's assume there's a $500 bill owed to the doctor. So when you're looking at these numbers, again, that number is going to be coming out of the settlement. Let's assume litigation cost is $450. And what I mean by that is not just, deposition, things like that, but getting medical records and things like that. So under this case, it's settled pretty early, so litigation costs were pretty low. Let's assume the coverage of insurance limits is $100,000. So that means that, and let's assume here for purposes of our case, the defendant had $100,000 in liability coverage. So that's all that we're dealing with. And let's say you decide under this hypothetical to settle for this $100,000 limit. And whether or not that's a good decision or not, that's kind of outside the scope of this video, but let's assume that you settled for $100,000. So you got a $100,000 check coming to you. So whenever there's a settlement, your attorney is going to get the settlement check, and they're going to put it in their trust account. And from that, they're going to deduct the amounts that are going to be paid off, and you'll get the amount remaining in that settlement fund. So let's assume here the attorney's fees for the $100,000 is 33% or a third. This is kind of the industry standard. We actually beat that a little bit, but let's assume that it's at this standard, the third. So $33,000 off the top is going to go to the attorney's fees. Let's assume, again, going back to the health insurance reimbursement, that you've got to pay that $5,000 lien back. So that's going to come off the top. The outstanding bill, again, that's going to come out of the settlement. That's going to go to $500 to be paid out. And let's assume you've authorized that payment. And let's assume in which you will have to reimburse for litigation costs. So you will end up paying $450 for that bill. And by the way, let me back up a little bit. When I say attorney's fees at 33%, this is what we call a contingency fee. That's the way most personal injury attorneys get paid. We get paid a percentage of your settlement after the case is done. We're the one who fronts the cost and things like that. So here, litigation costs are relatively nominal, but if we went to litigate it, we usually front those. So when you look at these numbers and you deduct all that from the settlement, you're looking at a settlement proceeds for you of $60,050. So basic math, hopefully this is pretty straightforward for you. Now let's do another hypothetical. Let's assume that you said, you know what? I don't like that $100,000 settlement. I don't think it's fair. I want to go to trial. And let's just assume that you end up having to go to trial to get that $100,000. Maybe you got a verdict in excess of that, but let's assume from the insurance money that you still get $100,000. So here, attorney's fees stay the same. It's still 33% contingency fee. Here, health insurance lien, that does not change. It's still $5,000. Here, the outstanding bills, again, they stay the same. It's $500. But where the change is going to be is you're going to have an increased litigation cost of $10,000. So why would you have an increased litigation cost if you go to trial? There are things that happen to get to trial that cost money, depositions and things like that. But the biggest expense usually is going to be your doctor. So here, you have to have a doctor come and testify that you suffered a tendon tear, that you had surgery, and this is what they did during the surgery, and it was all related to the accident. It was all necessitated by the accident. It was fair and reasonable treatment. So that's the reason now you've got increased litigation cost. Now, based upon this, if you had to go to trial to get this $100,000, now your money from the settlement funds is $50,500. So you're actually seeing less money here if you go to trial to get the $100,000 rather than if you actually settle for the $100,000. So you need to be thinking about that. So a couple things to be thinking about. And I always tell people, when you're thinking about the value of your case, you need to be thinking about net value to you personally. So a few things to think about under this example. First of all, if you go to trial, the amount is never guaranteed. Okay. So under the circumstance where you get less money in your pocket under the hypothetical, to get to that money, it's not guaranteed. In fact, you can lose at trial. Let's say that under our liability seemed clear, but a defense attorney convinced a jury that you were contributory negligent. Under that scenario, you get $0. So now you went to trial and you pretty much put it all away. Okay. So you never know what's going to happen at a trial. In fact, I will say, as plaintiff's attorneys, we try to do a good job of giving you an assessment as to what's the likelihood of trial, but we can just never guarantee what a jury is going to do. And sometimes they do some pretty weird things. So let's now go to the next one. Let me adjust this again real quick. You can get more than $100,000 from this defendant. Let's, again, under a hypothetical, the defendant, the driver that caused the accident, had $100,000 in coverage. Okay. Now, if you went to trial, and let's say the reason that you went to trial is you say to me, James, I think my case is worth more than $100,000. And, a wrist tear, a tendon tear, may be worth more than $100,000. I think $100,000 for this kind of case is probably fairly reasonable under Virginia conservative juries. But let's say you think it's worth 150 and you decide that you're going to go to trial, reject that. The way that it works is if you get a judgment over the amount of, judgment over the amount of insurance coverages, you get the $100,000, the insurance coverage from the insurance company, but then you're left with seeking the additional funds directly from the defendant themselves. And my saying is always, you can't make rocks bleed. And what I mean by that is, if somebody has limited insurance, a lot of the times they're not going to have a whole lot of cash sitting around to pay a judgment. That's not always the case. And obviously I'm making assumptions. Sometimes people just get bad advice about what kind of insurance to get. Sometimes they just don't pay for insurance, whatever the case may be. But if you settle for the insurance money, at least you know that you're going to get the money. If you try to go for more, again, there's always a risk of trial and maybe you get more, but then you've got to be left with collecting the additional funds from the defendant. I can tell you, we actually don't do collections here at Abrenio Law. We'll farm that out if that's the case, but it's hard to get money from the collections, but it's an option. Next thing, there is stress and the uncertainty of trial. There is value in that. The value of having to go through the stress, the value of having uncertainty versus the value of money now. There is value in getting the cash now and not having to deal with the stress. And when I'm talking about the stretch of trial, if let's say you get a settlement pre-trial, pre-filing, you're probably not going to get a trial date for a year. And then during that year, you're living through that stress. So you need to be thinking about the value of settling money up front and getting that value on hand, and always be thinking about net value, but add in a premium for money now and less risk about worry of stress and uncertainty. That being said, I always want to be clear. Ultimately, the decision about whether or not to settle a case, that is going to be your decision and your decision alone. If we are representing you here at Abrenio Law, we can give you our thoughts. We can tell you, hey, that we think it's worth X, Y, and Z. We think that this is a good settlement value. In fact, we do a written settlement evaluation before we have you settle your case in most cases. But ultimately, it's going to be your decision to make. Now, that being said, we try to do a good job of giving you a fair assessment here at Abrenio Law earlier rather than later, because what we don't want to have is we're 2 years into a case, and then all of a sudden now we're telling you, well, we think the case is worth $50,000, and you're not happy with that, and you still want to go to trial, and we have this big divergence as to what we think value is. Our view is we'd rather be upfront with you sooner and earlier on, so you can make an assessment not only about what your case is worth, but also how we see it. And if you don't think that, quote, we don't believe in your case, or we have a different value set, you don't have to hire us. In fact, a lot of times, if I have a big divergence in what I think a case is worth from the client or the potential client, I'll tell them that straight up. And I'll say to them, look, I might not be the right attorney for you. We probably aren't the right firm for you. Go out in the marketplace and find somebody else, and maybe they can get you what you need. And look, we hope that we're wrong about this. At the end of the day, if we're wrong about a value of a case, you end up getting full value. I'm happy you giving us a call and talking about all the attorney's fees we lost, because that means you got what you needed. You got a fair value for your case. Here at Abrenio Law, our job is to fairly and objectively assess these things to kind of give you what we think is a fair value. We're not trying to hard sell you. We're not a used car dealership. We want to be honest with you and have a great relationship with you, and hopefully meet your expectations. But we also want to set reasonable expectations as well. If we think a case is worth $50,000 and you think it's worth $750, we're never going to meet you there. And you're free to your opinion, but our opinion is based upon years of experience and a lot of trials. But look, we're not perfect, and sometimes we get things wrong. So hopefully you're closer to right in that scenario than we are. But I think we do a very good job about analyzing cases. But look, hopefully this video is useful. Here's my information, website, phone number, email address. Hopefully you found value in this video. If you have, make sure to subscribe. Comment below if you have questions. We try to shoot videos pretty regularly, and a lot of times we'll base that upon recommendations from our viewers. So wish you guys the best. Until next time, be safe.